I am delighted to have secured this adjournment debate, not on an issue right at the top of the political agenda, perhaps, but one which affects the lives of hundreds of people in my constituency every day: street parking on residential estates in Bracknell. It's a topic that perhaps comes up more than any other on the doorstep, particularly in parts of Bracknell where we have older estates. And it is a real challenge for people, one that affects not only their ability to get around our fantastic community, but also in some cases their safety as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the core challenges we face is the mismatch between older estate design and modern car ownership. Bracknell is an older new town. It celebrated its 75th birthday last year, and while it was designed with excellent active travel network built into the very heart of its DNA, it is also true that Bracknell was designed around the car. It is an easy place to get around by car. We are very lucky that we don't see massive issues with traffic jams and the like, but it is the case, as with many towns across the country, people do still rely on their cars. And the challenge is that many of the estates across Bracknell, particularly in areas like Wild Ridings, Great Hollands and East Hampstead, we see estates that were built when households typically had one small vehicle, if that. Now, of course, many households have more than one car, and the cars are larger to boot. We also, frankly, because of the nature of the housing market, are increasingly seeing more generations living in the same family home, which only compounds the issue yet further. The garages that were built alongside the estates I'm talking about in Bracknell Forest were built for a different kind of car. They're narrow, and many no longer fit cars of the size that people drive today. So the obvious conclusion to all of this is exactly what we see. Vehicles spilling out onto roads, verges and pavements, and where households don't have a driveway, that does cause a huge challenge around space.
Will my honourable friend give way on that very point?
I'd be delighted to.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is making an excellent speech. I think he is about to describe the incredible pressure that many residents feel because of parking problems, whether that's the difficulty of parking near their own home or the difficulty of perhaps walking along a pavement because there's pavement parking, or many other problems, and it drives people absolutely crazy. There's real pressure on communities up and down the country, in my experience. Does he agree with me that what is possibly needed to help ease some of this is for the government to have a little bit of a new look at some of the existing regulations, further refining the residents' parking scheme, and also perhaps looking at some of the more tricky issues where perhaps there's one person or a group of people parking again and again on an unrestricted road. In my own constituency, I've had issues where people commuting to work have unfortunately parked on the same road time and again, and that can be very frustrating for residents. But as he says, the basic problem is there are very many more vehicles nowadays, and it is difficult to accommodate the parking needs, but we must try.
I thank my honourable friend for that really insightful intervention. In Bracknell Forest, we have very low levels of permit parking zones, and the reason for that is it just simply wouldn't work for our community. But the point he makes is absolutely correct, and it's something I'm going to come back to time and time again in this debate: the need for local areas to come up with the local solutions to address these very local problems, because ultimately communities like his in Reading and mine in Bracknell Forest know best what the solutions are to tackle some of these endemic issues.
On that point, would he give way?
Absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for the speech that he's making. This issue is one that plagues residents in my area as well. Two particular issues are parking around school pick up and drop off, which is a particular issue. I wondered if he's found the same. And also in estates that are unadopted, there are real difficulties in enforcing when there is dangerous parking. So I wondered if he'd also acknowledge that that is an issue that needs to be addressed with local authorities as well as the government.
Absolutely, and I think that the challenge around schools is really well-made one. It is, of course, we all want to see more young people, more families walking to school, cycling to school, but in some communities that just isn't possible. And also we have to be realistic, in some communities it just doesn't happen. So the end result is often in streets like, for example, Staplehurst in Great Hollands, where we see a lot of conflict between those going to pick up their kids from school and the families who live in those streets, who just need to be, frankly, able to get out and not have to dictate to their movements around the timings of the school day. It is a real challenge. I think, again, it's the case that in situations like this, local solutions really need to be the vehicle forward, if you'll pardon the pun. And on the point about enforcement, again, I think that's a really important part of the puzzle. What I would say is, and we've certainly seen this in Bracknell Forest, with all of the best will in the world, traffic wardens could come down some of the streets in Bracknell Forest every hour of every day and litter every car with tickets. Frankly, if there isn't the parking infrastructure there to allow those cars to park, enforcement can only go so far. So I think absolutely enforcement is part of the solution, but it's not the only part. Absolutely.
My honourable neighbour for giving way and congratulating him for this adjournment debate. As he knows, Binfield in my constituency is also part of Bracknell Forest, and one of the issues that we have in Binfield is commercial businesses being run from residential properties and the increased demands of parking that can often have. I really support his call for localised support and localised action to be able to help target this. So would he like to work together with Bracknell Forest and me in trying to come up with a solution that we can do together?
That sounds like an excellent campaign. I have to say, not something I've necessarily identified in a huge way in my part of Bracknell Forest, but absolutely, perhaps we can have a further discussion in the tea room on that very important issue. Absolutely.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. I spoke to the Honourable Gentleman for Bracknell before, and can I congratulate him on bringing this forward? It was in the chat we were having beforehand on the issues in my constituency of Strangford, very similar to his own and recent to the older estates where the houses were built in the 60s, 70s. The roads are narrow. The very nature of the roads were never built for cars or for houses that had 2 cars plus. And also then the thing is aggravated whenever children have they go to learn to drive. The department back home came up with the idea of enabling those who have driveways onto the road to have a white line put across it where cars can't park in front. That's okay in the mind, but in reality it doesn't work. It doesn't work because cars have to go in and out. And then when cars park either side of it, there's a problem. So does the Honourable Member agree? And he knows it, I know it. It leads to frustration, it leads to anger, it leads to fisticuffs, it leads to neighbourhoods and neighbours falling out. And really, if there's an initiative from this House, within this House, and we look to the Minister for that, it has to start here with legislatively or directional from here, and then the councils back home can take the responsibility and take it to the next stage. Again, well done to the Honourable Gentleman and bringing this forward. There's not one of us here in this House that don't agree with him.
I thank the Honourable Member for intervening, and may I say what an honour it is to be intervened by the Honourable Member for Strangford. What I would say is I want to take his suggestion and sort of flip it on its head. I do feel that local solutions are the best way to tackle what is often local issues. And I think part of the reason for that is exactly what we've heard from members across the House today. It's that in every community, almost in every street, the reality is that different issues will be causing some of the parking woes that we've heard him so powerfully refer to. So for me, this is perhaps the greatest example of an issue that must be led from the bottom up. And in fact, what I think this place can do is empower local leaders to come forward with the common sense answers, the common sense strategies to address these very real issues in our communities. One of the challenges we've got in Bracknell Forest is that in estates where a large number of homes without driveways were once council houses, they are now in private ownership. But the estates themselves have been transferred to a social housing association, ABRI, making the issue even trickier to address. Bracknell Forest Council is working hard to tackle this in exactly that proactive, practical way that I've been referring to. And they've been undertaking a scheme to convert grass verges into additional parking spaces, almost road by road. Identifying underused grass verges and converting them into usable, safe parking bays. And it's being done in partnership with ABRI. And that's an excellent example of what can be achieved when councils and housing associations work collaboratively together to address shared challenges. I have to say, it hasn't always been easy, and it has involved complex legal issues around transferring ownership from the social housing provider to the council. But I do want to thank both the council and ABRI for working proactively together to address the concerns. I also want to make it clear that this is not a silver bullet. These schemes are making a real difference in parts of Bracknell Forest, but I am fully aware that it's not enough and there are real challenges that remain. It would be fantastic to see more action taken from a government perspective to support local authorities to work with social housing providers in delivering these small-scale, locally targeted infrastructure improvements. It's not about massive investment. It's not even necessarily about a very complex solution. It's very sort of obvious and commonsensical. It's just about unlocking existing local potential by simplifying the process. And of course, I do recognise that converting grass verges may be to some anathema. Let me be clear. I support access to green space. And I don't want to see every corner of Bracknell Forest tarmacked
Would my honourable friend give way on that?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think my honourable friend again is making an excellent point, and may I just remind him that there's a great deal of underused brownfield land which sometimes can be made available for parking. And in my own constituency, previously as a councillor, I worked on a scheme to tarmac an unadopted road. And as one of the other colleagues here mentioned tonight, unadopted roads, other areas of hard standing, which aren't formally used for parking, can be converted without any loss of green space.
That makes a fantastic point, and it really reinforces again that local need for finding solutions. It is also the case, as in Bracknell Forest, that where cars are parking on grass verges already, because of the lack of parking spaces, tearing up the grass and in some cases causing safety concerns, blocking blind corners, converting some of those verges in a safer way into proper parking spaces is the common sense thing to do. It's not taking away valuable green space. It's making sure, in fact, we can protect the grass verges that we do need much better. Another growing pressure on our estates, and this is very much one that I know is on the government's radar, is the need to transition to EVs. As things stand, EV charging on housing estates with roadside-only parking is almost impossible for many residents. Without driveways or off-street bays, there's nowhere to install a home charger. And charging cables trailing across pavements raise serious safety concerns for pedestrians, wheelchair users and families alike. Bracknell Forest Council has been leading the way in installing charging infrastructure in council car parks, and there's good coverage for those who need to charge up. But there is a challenge here. It can't be right that households with a driveway, more likely to be affluent already, can access cheaper and easier EV charging at home without paying VAT, while households without a driveway struggle to access at-home charging and have to pay above the odds at rapid charging stations. It's not just a Bracknell issue, it's a national challenge, and it is a critical barrier to equitable access to EVs, particularly for those living in older estates.
Will the honourable member give way?
Absolutely.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and for raising these very important issues, and that I know his constituents will be delighted that he is doing on their behalf. In Ealing, electric vehicle charging points have been a major concern of the council to ensure they meet the need, and there are currently 900 electric vehicle charging points throughout the borough, but we will need 1,800 by 2030. And so the council has just been consulting on an electric vehicle rollout strategy in order to take a strategic approach to the issue. Does he agree that other areas would benefit from taking a similar strategic approach to the rollout of electric vehicle charging points?
Absolutely, and it once again goes to that point of local solutions being really, really important. What I would say is that I really want to thank the government for their work on reforms set out by the National Energy System Operator to improve the speed at which EV charging infrastructure can be added to the grid. I will press on because I'm conscious that I'm fast approaching the witching hour. There's another technical but very ill issue I would very briefly like to raise, and that's one that makes it harder for local authorities up and down the country to introduce parking restrictions. Even simple localised restrictions can cost up to £1,000 in advertising fees because of the requirement to publicise them under the Road Traffic Regulation Act in a local newspaper. And that's money not going towards tarmac or signage, but simply to advertising costs. As a result, residents can be waiting for months for a minor change that could immediately improve safety and accessibility. Finally, I want to touch very briefly on the issue of pavement parking, which I know is a divisive subject. Many members of this House have argued that it should be illegal to park on pavements. I understand why they hold such a view. I recognise how difficult it is for people with pushchairs, as well as disabled people, especially blind people, to navigate pavements when cars are parked. I've also met and heard from a fantastic charity, Sustrans, on this issue. But the reality is, if you enforce a total ban on pavement parking in Bracknell Forest, there would be simply nowhere left to park. On many narrow estates, pavement parking is the only way the road can remain passable. So I would support giving local authorities the powers to decide where to ban pavement parking based on local needs and knowledge. Again, it's about local flexibility. Councils know their communities best, communities know what's best for them, and let's trust them to make the right calls and empower them to tackle this really significant issue facing so many families in Bracknell Forest and across the country.
Sir, Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important matter with the government today, and congratulating on securing this important debate. I've heard his concerns regarding the inadequate provision of parking across his constituency, and I recognise the issues he raises in terms particularly of the accessibility of parking. These are important issues which have a direct link to the welfare of local communities and the economic prosperity of our towns. Let me cover some of the main points that have been raised in his remarks and other interventions. As my honourable friend will be all too aware, competition for parking spaces, especially for accessible street parking across this country, is already substantial. The government recognised the provision of accessible and reliable parking is particularly important outside of the major metropolitan areas, where public transportation is often limited and where people need to be able to drive to access basic services and economic centres. Whilst the government understands the benefits of private car use for individuals up and down the country, with many across our communities relying on private vehicles as a key part of their lives, I also recognise that many estates are simply not equipped to deal with the numbers of cars we now have on our roads. This is most keenly felt by residents in older estates. This has of course been exacerbated, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the fact that modern cars have not only grown in number but also in size, as my honourable friend rightly referenced in his remarks. As a result, the growing demand for the provision of parking risk becomes unmanageable. This will not only be frustrating to residents who own vehicles, but can also lead to irresponsible or even dangerous parking in prohibited areas. My department is aware of the complaints many residents of Bracknell Forest have raised about parked vehicles preventing the flow of traffic, and I welcome the measures the Council have now put in place to prevent this. Whilst this government recognises the importance of adequate provision of street parking for local communities, in line with the government's position on localism, parking is ultimately the responsibility of local authorities, and it is for them to determine what is appropriate in their area. And local authorities already have powers to implement and enforce parking restrictions. Now, it's the government's understanding that Bracknell Forest Council has acknowledged the pressures with street parking in the community and are in the process of implementing a parking strategy with the objective to support the provision of parking in the borough. I note the concerns my honourable friend raises regarding the Council's progress today. However, it is right that local authorities have autonomy over the nature and scope of parking policies within their local area. As he rightly recognised when he spoke about local solutions, local authorities are best placed to balance the needs of residents, emergency services, local businesses and those who work in and visit their area. Of course, the government is committed to investing in local communities and improving local transport infrastructure. The Department for Transport recently allocated £203,000 to Bracknell Forest Council from the Local Transport Resource Funding Scheme. Under this scheme, local transport authorities can use this funding to build their capability and capacity to develop ambitious transport schemes and to develop and update local transport plans, deliver local delivery plans and fund individual projects and retain the transport expertise to do this. When it comes to pavement parking, I well understand that this can be a real problem for pedestrians, for wheelchair users, for those with prams and buggies, and particularly for people with mobility or visual impairments. And we are mindful of the concerns many people have raised about inconsiderate pavement parking. As my honourable friend is likely already aware, the Department for Transport held a consultation back in 2020 on the complex problem of pavement parking. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government intends to publish a formal response to that consultation later this year, which will summarise the views received and announce the government's next steps for pavement parking policy. In the meantime, highways authorities may introduce specific local pavement parking restrictions using their existing TRO making powers, and these can be enforced by councils using their civil parking enforcement powers. My honourable friend also raised the topic of electric vehicle charging on housing estates with roadside parking. The government is committed to making EV charging infrastructure more affordable and accessible, particularly for those without off-street parking. Most electric vehicle drivers charge overnight at home, which is often the most convenient and cost-effective option. To support those without on-street parking, the government offers a grant for homes to purchase a charge point when paired with a cross-pavement charging solution. The department is aware of at least 26 trials and hundreds of individual installations of cross-pavement solutions across the UK. The government is also working with local authorities to encourage this technology. And in December 2024, the government published cross-pavement guidance to help local authorities understand what they need to consider for the rollout of cross-pavement solutions. This includes relevant planning permissions, minimum existing standards, responsibilities and case studies of trials. For private land, Madam Deputy Speaker, such as the residential estates my honourable friend has mentioned, the landowners or private car park operators are responsible for parking provision and enforcement. I'm pleased to hear that Bracknell Forest Council is working with local landowners, including housing associations, to deliver more parking capacity across the community. Whilst housing associations are private bodies and must make their own decisions on how they run their businesses, the neighbourhood and community standard is clear that providers must cooperate with partners to promote social, environmental and economic well-being. This standard includes a specific expectation that housing associations cooperate with local authorities to support them in achieving their objectives. However, the regulator of social housing does not dictate how individual housing associations demonstrate how they comply with this duty. But I welcome the cooperation that my honourable friend has mentioned. I'm glad to hear his local authorities working collaboratively with AVRI, the housing association in question. And I'm pleased by Bracknell Council's commitment through its parking strategy to work with housing associations generally to help alleviate the pressures on parking. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable friend once again for raising this matter with the government today. We recognise the significant concerns many communities, particularly those residing in older estates, face regarding the accessibility and availability of parking. This essential resource is under increasing pressure, and we fully support local councils in their endeavours to mitigate these challenges. As I've said, local councils are best positioned to lead these initiatives as they possess the intimate knowledge of their areas and can effectively consider factors such as traffic flow capacity, road safety and the diverse needs of residents, visitors and businesses. But I hope I'll give my honourable friend a sense of what the government is doing to support them.